even for my 21-year-old who could be working in the maritime industry, she doesn't, but she could be coming into the maritime industry, has all of those skills and sort of view of the world and how to engage with technology, and in some cases even other people, which is weird for people like myself. But how we don't have an industry ready for them is going to make it very hard to bring the next generation of folks into this industry.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothenburg. Welcome to episode 185 of the Shipping Podcast. Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you for tuning in. This is where we talk about the coolest industry on the planet and help raise the maritime industry's profile. There is a special place for innovation in my heart. So, when Caitlin Hardy in episode 179 suggested that I should connect with someone that she admires, I knew it would be worth a try. Also, I have a dream, an incubator for the maritime startups in Sweden. But until that happens, I'm speaking to centers of maritime innovation wherever I can get hold of them. And Washington Maritime Blue in Seattle is exciting, as that is the hometown of all the brands we now know as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. I hope you will enjoy my conversation with Joshua Berger, the founder and president CEO of Washington Maritime Blue. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I am Joshua Berger. I am the founder, president, and CEO of Washington Maritime Blue. We are an innovation cluster organization focused on how we help accelerate a sustainable and equitable blue economy, maritime and ocean related.
So I have found a soulmate here, I think.
I think so.
Because that is what I am also interested in, and we could be transparent to say that Caitlin Hardy actually introduced us to each other.
Yes.
So it's probably more of what Caitlin was talking about that we are going to talk about.
I'd hope so. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Caitlin. She has been a friend and a mentor and a leader for a long time, and we've been engaging on these topics for quite a while.
What is your background? What is your education? How did you come in contact with shipping?
I would say the bulk of my education was at sea, really. By background, I'm a merchant mariner. I spent a number of years working in the tug and tow industry, mostly offshore tugboats, but some inland work as well. But my real passion as a younger man, or at least still today, is on traditional sailing ships. Actually, I had the incredible privilege to work and in many cases be captain of traditional sailing vessels that are used as platforms for education, mostly around ocean literacy, environmental conservation, and technology innovation. So that's sort of my trade background. Academically, I focused really on multi-stakeholder planning. So my master's degree is in participatory planning, again, mostly focused around sustainability and technology innovation. So with the two, I've ended up here today.
So you have the best of both worlds in a way.
I think so. I guess my career, when I look at it often, I feel like there are times where I really want to be at the 30,000 foot level and thinking about policy and process that's going to sort of drive, change, creative change. But then I also feel like I really need to get down to sea level, right? And be on a boat and do stuff and work with kids and work with people and get my hands dirty. So I've jumped back and forth throughout sort of my early career. And I feel like I get to do both of that now, right? I get to play at sort of a policy level, certainly thinking a lot about planning and process. But at the same time, we're sort of, we're in it with wrenches and deck plates and trying to get stuff done. I know we're sort of at a podcast, but our new logo, I think, or our new tagline for our organization is get quotes, stuff done and don't be a jerk. That's just sort of like bottom line what it has come down to for us.
Yeah, but the reason for me asking you about your background is that I think that we are rather lousy when it comes to recruitment, because we are not that good at telling the story of the shipping industry, where it's so much interesting jobs that you can have.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the case, I think, for quite a while, right? There's, even so I'm in Seattle, Washington, on the west coast of the US. Our city is right here on Puget Sound, and we overlook the water and beautiful mountains, and we see ferries and ships and orca whales, but it's remarkably not that accessible to so many people, particularly underrepresented communities and communities of color don't get access or sort of are invited or necessarily even feel safe along the working waterfront, let alone on board vessels. So it's this, sort of mysterious place and mysterious things that happens out there once you cross the tide line. And yeah, I think you're exactly right. We have a lot of work to do to share and showcase and introduce and make welcoming the maritime industry. Yeah.
Because when you Google shipping or maritime industry with pictures, you get Popeye.
It's true. It's true.
It's so depressing.
Yeah.
And that is not true at all when it comes to our industry, because it's so exciting. And I think it's great to be part of it now when so many things are actually happening.
Yeah.
The change it's been a long way coming.
Yeah. And especially for us who do look a little bit like Popeye, right? I'm a middle-aged white man with tattoos on my arms, working in the shipping industry for a long time. And it's sort of, there's a responsibility that falls on us in a number of ways, right? To make accessible and make aware, be welcoming, and provide leadership opportunities for those of us that don't look like Popeye or look like me, to provide mentors and leaders that look like our communities who have opportunities to engage. Yeah, that's critical.
That's part of why I started this podcast, for especially the younger generation who was much earlier in listening to podcasts, to find us and to see, wow, there is an entire world out there which is maritime, which might interest me.
Yeah.
So what do you do at the Washington Maritime Blue? What do you do there?
Yeah, what do I do? Well, we get stuff done. I think that's what it comes down to. So we are and have developed this organization much in the model that we have learned from our Northern European partners, Asian and others, as an innovation cluster organization. So we bring those multi-stakeholders, private industry, public agencies, research institutions, and community organizations together to help accelerate technology innovation, sustainability, and equity. So that's what we do, but we do it in a number of different ways. We'll start with workforce. How do we help support this equitable and 21st century workforce into the future of maritime and ocean broadly? And we do the work. So we often call ourselves logo farmers. So we put logos in boxes on screens, and we help them work together. So around workforce development, we have found ourselves in a role to help facilitate a whole slew of youth serving maritime organizations, educational institutions, high schools, middle schools, our community colleges, and public agencies to help create particularly accessible pathways and workforce development pathways into the maritime industry. So we're facilitators in that way. We connect youth and community-based organizations to youth-serving organizations, and then ultimately on to employers. And we provide wraparound services for youth and employers to create paid internships opportunities. So, we're supporting youth to find opportunities and experience what it is that's out there. A series of different programmings, give them opportunities to work on building boats or visit a national lab or NOAA's engineering space, and then pair them up with employers who are interested in engaging with the youth. But we provide wraparound services to the employers as well. We were speaking a bit about sort of, how we make workforce and maritime opportunities more accessible. Well, there are employers who also want to work on that, but may not have the skills on how to have a more sort of safe and accepting cultural environment. And what's the workplace culture? We provide diversity, equity, and inclusion training to employers. And we're there to support them, right? When they have a series of interns and they're having maybe a communication problem or don't understand why travel might be so hard coming from one part of the county to another part of the county, we're there to provide the support services to the employers as well. So workforce is a space that we're engaged in. That's just one piece of it. The other areas that we work in is we support startup companies. We run an accelerator program and an incubator program focused on the blue economy, maritime shipping and logistics, specifically for one of our incubator programs in Tacoma, which is a large port area in our state and in our region. So we have a whole suite of programs supporting startups and founders. And then we run what we call joint innovation projects or joint innovation programs. Again, highly modeled after our friends in Northern Europe and in the Nordics, where we try to bring together a whole value chain to build something, pilot something, demonstrate something, do a feasibility study on something. One of our prime projects right now is everything from the designer, the transit authority, the builder, and even the regulator, and the folks interested in economic development to design, assess, and construct the first zero-emission foiling fast ferry. It was a concept design that one of our member companies brought to us and said, hey, can you help us bring together that whole value chain and let's get it done and demonstrate the first vessel. So we call those joint innovation projects where our members can work collaboratively. Sometimes even competitors come together to help create standards or open up a new market opportunity for the industry. Those are some of the main areas where we're working. We do big projects with our member companies. We support founders and startup companies, and we're supporting pathways for workforce development. So those are sort of our main areas that we work in.
No wonder I sort of felt like I recognized something on your website, because I could see the same thoughts going around the globe probably.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are thinking on the same things, and we have some challenges. I mean, the entire industry, and it's almost like a race to who's going to solve those problems. And sometimes I think we should work together, all of us, because it's our collective responsibility to solve them.
And I think there's general support, I think, for that idea. How do we collaborate? One of the greatest words we've learned over the last couple of years is co-opetition, right? So how do we, cooperate and collaborate during the day, and then we compete at night, right? And that will sort of accelerate. And I think the big question for me is, yes, that feels intrinsically right. We will do better if we're working together. You have a value set, you have a value set, we should work together. And then the question becomes, okay, how? Like, how do we work together? What's the mechanisms to do that? How do we bring together, frankly, the money and capacity to do that? How do we bring together the right minds? How do we sometimes have to say, okay, business development folks, you stay home, send us your engineers and let's solve a problem. And then we'll divvy it back out to the business development folks and we'll figure out how we'll all get a piece of this market. So the question becomes how, and we found this mechanism, a cluster organization, sort of the modern view of a cluster organization as an incredible way to get that done. And so we formed one here in Washington State to do that work. It came after a lot of bringing the industry together, though, to get there, right? In my former role, I worked for our state's governor, Jay Inslee, and our State Department of Commerce. And my role was really as a policy and economic development advisor for the maritime industry broadly. And what we looked at is we said, look, here in our state, we have what's now a $40+ billion maritime industry that drives so much, basically a third of our state's economy is somehow tied and related to the maritime industry, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. We have a very strong environmental ethic across this region. We're leaders in this thing, the climate and clean energy transition, strong policies that support that and incentives. We have here in Seattle one of the fastest growing technology sectors. Certainly we've got the Amazons and Microsofts and Expedia's here, but also an incredible culture of technology development and startup and and a lot of capital that's, private capital that's running through our area. We have great companies like Boeing and all of their suppliers, so incredible capacity on advanced manufacturing. So we looked at all of that and we're like, there's no reason why we don't lead in this thing, the blue economy. But how, right? How do we go get that done? So we spent about a year and a half bringing together all of those folks, and we created the first and still really only comprehensive state strategy for the blue economy. And states and governments are wonderful for bringing people together and helping create a clear vision. But then again, we said, okay, well, now who's going to do it? Who's going to implement it? And then frankly, it's not the state's job or best capacity to do that work. We have to do it with industry, with our research and, national labs and universities, with communities, with labor organizations. And a cluster organization just made sense to be the place where all those interests could come together and we could help push that forward. So we formed Maritime Blue really at the same time that we released that state strategy and said, okay, here's the strategy and here's the organization that's going to lead and be accountable to get it done.
It sounds exciting.
It has been. And it's really been sort of exponential in the last four years since we've done that work. We're now over 125 members, which include everything of some of the largest OEMs like Wärtsilä and ABB and D&V, down to one-person engineering shops and our national labs, but also local transit authorities and ports and educational institutions and community and environmental organizations that are doing this work every day with us.
How many people are there working at the Maritime Blue?
So we just hired our 11th full-time person, which is sort of mind-boggling to me in the last 4 years. We're sort of a startup ourselves. I've been learning a lot from our director of Blue Ventures, who runs all of our startup programming. He's a founder and an investor and an educator. And I learn from him every day, sort of, how we just run this organization. I'm having an incredible learning opportunity and a lot of fun, sort of building an organization in the same vein and the same values of the blue economy around sustainability and equity every day. So I am having fun with sort of the organizational development part of this as well. And our team is just phenomenal and moving the actual projects and programs forward.
So how do you see the future for shipping then? I mean, you're working on all this things changing and startups and so on.
So that's a great question. I think there are days and times where I feel like we are right in the middle of a major kind of transition and transformation. But we also have to sort of check ourselves on how reasonably fast we can make large changes for a number of reasons. These are big technology and big capital and infrastructure projects in an industry that can't sort of like stop and start. It must continue. What is it? 80 to 90% of everything moving, right? It's going by sea. We can't just start and stop it. And they're very tight margins. So if we're going to support these companies, these large, shipping lines or beneficial cargo owners to keep the jobs going, keep the work going, there's a sort of the transition has to be gradual at the same time that major transformation is happening. And that's a hard thing to balance. But, I feel like big things come, digitalization is a big part of that, right? I think ask a number of the, different organizations and agencies, right? 20% or some odd of decarbonization will come just through efficiencies that can be driven through data and the digitalization of the maritime industry, whether that's in ports or onboard vessels or the whole supply chain. And, that in and of itself, a lot of that technology is sort of off the shelf at this point and ready to be utilized in this industry sector. And that will come quick, I believe. Said for sort of person behavioral change management in a very traditional industry. And then there's the large infrastructure of what the future of fuels will look like and the infrastructure to support it. But it feels like we're on the precipice of something and a lot is happening at the same time, but it's hard to predict how fast it will come, right?
we are all part of the industry revolution 4.0. I mean, everyone, not only our industry, so everyone is in that. But maybe we had a longer way before we started. That is my view anyhow. I've been doing this podcast for 6.5 years now. And at the beginning, I asked everyone, what do you think about autonomous ships? And that was a generational reply to that, because all master mariners older than I am said, well, that will never happen. And the younger people said, I can't wait to test it. I want to know, when is it coming? So after a while, I stopped asking that question. But I do a lot. I do a lot of work with the automotive industry. There is a cluster of automotive industry here in Gothenburg, because we are, the home city of Volvo a long time ago. But all the automotive brands have their software development here in Gothenburg, and I do work with that cluster as well, because I think there is so much we can learn from them, and they are on the same path as we are, because it's transportation, it's the sustainability, it's the scandals with when they actually maybe they did something wrong but wouldn't want to tell us. And they have also developed different kinds of alternative fuels, and it's so interesting. I can't see any of the maritime companies in this city talking to them, which is, why not?
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I was thinking earlier, so my father actually came out of the automotive industry, publisher. He worked for a major car magazine, and then sort of found water and boats and sailing, which piqued my interest. But it's really interesting. You sort of drive the comparison. It's a global market. It's a global supply chain. They have, arguably, still though, a significant amount of infrastructure that needs to support whatever the future is, whether it's charging or fuels, and few very large companies, right, that are going to drive change. And that's a there are a lot of parallels to our industry in maritime and shipping.
Yes, there is. And I also work with the cluster. I'm too much into clusters, but I like the way of collaboration. I also work with a cluster where it's about broadband and digital, connectivity and things like that. And so I get to listen to the best people who are developing 5G, and Ericsson has got their development office for 5G here in the city for the world. I mean, and it's also, if we don't have connectivity, you don't have self-driving cars or autonomous cars, and all of the things that will happen moving forward is also to do with connectivity.
Yeah. So we're engaged in a big project along that, and self-driving cars is one thing, but right now, still in our major ports, the third largest container gateway in the United States between Seattle and Tacoma, there's still much happening on pen and paper, right? We don't even have enough connectivity that even if you were going to check the maintenance of a vehicle, that you're even have enough connectivity for your iPad to work on the terminal. And so, self-driving cars and automation, maybe even further down the road, particularly here in the US, probably for some good reason. We just released a feasibility study, which Ericsson was a part of, and many others. We are proposing to develop a private enterprise scale 5G network over a whole port area, the Tacoma Tide Flats, that would support the technology developments, IoT and 5G enabled technology developments across that whole region, for terminal operators and shipping, but also for the manufacturing and environmental data monitoring that's happening across that region. And we brought together sort of the brightest minds around the globe, from Sweden and Finland and Norway and Seattle and San Francisco, to come, think about what are the use cases for 5G, IoT, and in many cases, sort of high-speed edge computing right in the terminal too. And there's a lot we don't know that our industry doesn't understand. There's a lot where, sort of what it is and what it isn't, and what we might be capable of. And, and at the same time here in the US, we are in desperate need to bring that data together Not only the infrastructure just to enable 5G, that's one thing, and that's pretty easy, right? Ericsson makes great radio towers, as does many other people. We can put a 5G network in place in a few months and a couple $1 million. That's sort of the easy part. But then what do we do with it? How do we manage sort of sharing, just fundamentally, let alone getting access to that data? What's proprietary, what's not. And our ports are really interesting, and this may be fundamentally American, but that's very siloed. We have multiple different terminal operators in one port area. The port itself is just a landlord port. We have independent truck drivers. We have, multiple railroads, public and private, that come through, emergency management services, different utilities, different municipalities, all are generating and then need access to data. And there's nobody to date, not only getting access to that data, but then figuring out how to share it so that we can just be efficient.
Yeah. Have you heard about the program called Maritime Informatics that has set up here in Gothenburg? Yeah, with Michael Lind and all of those guys.
Yes.
It's so interesting when they are showing you all the information that is needed to be exchanged when you are doing a port call.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, as you say, exactly what you say. But I think that the most important thing that we could do is to start setting standards. I think we need the ISO standards. We need some standards so everyone is working with the same thing across the globe, because it's a bit silly to invent something here in Gothenburg which can't be used in Copenhagen
or in Seattle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I know that there are some efforts to do that, right? The International Association of Ports, they're gathering some folks. That process sometimes can feel frustratingly slow when there are others who are sort of ready to implement, right? I'd say you're absolutely right. It's sort of, but as we're developing those standards, there's still a lot that we can develop and start to use and implement, because we have a long way for our industry to know what it is and what it isn't. And to start to feel comfortable, start putting the workforce training programs in place, right, to support the port workers of the future as an industry, as a sort of a generation of the industry starts to retire, and a new generation of folks. I realized, so I have 4 kids. My oldest is 21. My youngest is 7. So I have a large breadth. But even my 21-year-old, she cannot remember a time where she did not use a touch screen. And so it's just sort of embedded in their lifestyle and how they do the work and how they view the world. And my 12-year-old, she is doing incredible art, math, science, all on touch screens, right? What she's producing, videos. And so that we're not sort of ready, even for my 21-year-old who could be working in the maritime industry. She doesn't, but she could be coming into the maritime industry, has all of those skills and sort of view of the world and how to engage with technology. And in some cases, even other people, which is weird for people like myself, but how we don't have an industry ready for them is going to make it very hard to bring the next generation of folks into this industry.
Yeah, but we have also been a little bit slow on introducing or inviting people with other skills into our industry, because we need other skills now as well, in addition to the ones that we already have.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's like very sort of common knowledge that we all know. Of course, we have different segments of our industry where you need different kind of skills and knowledge and so on. But in general, it's like a copy. There is not a lot of new things coming in. And when I see, for instance, the automotive industry or the connectivity industry, or whatever I should call it, they have so many other skills, and they are allowing that.
Yeah.
To lead them somewhere. So as you were talking about your kids, that's great. We need those people into our industry.
Yeah. I'm accused often of being sort of eternal optimist, but I do see it starting. I really do.
Yeah.
some of the younger folks I'm seeing. So my office here is at a working fisherman's terminal in Seattle. And I'm seeing the boats that you'll find on that TV show, The Deadliest Catch. We have the processors, we have folks from some of the cruise industry, tug and tow, sand and gravel, and barge, sort of all sort of very traditional maritime, Ballard, Seattle maritime industry right here. And then right behind me, right up the hill, is where we have Amazon and software developers. And we're going through this really interesting time, even before the pandemic. What are they calling it? The great transition, the great walkout, where people are sort of, leaving their traditional, their software engineering jobs and looking to do something right with some purpose and apply those skills. One of my board members is the founder of a company that's doing incredible things in the industry right now, Cosmo King, and the company is called IO Currents. He grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. He's done a bunch of sailing, so he understands sort of being on the water in the industry, and worked for a long time developing, AI technology and connectivity, machine learning for large development companies here in Seattle and Bellevue. And decided, he and his co-founders, we have to do something. We're just building machine learning and just building software for the sake of it, and we can apply it to some game or finance tech, but we wanted to do something real. And so he looked at how we could apply that into the maritime industry. And now the technology he's developed for the fishing industry, global offshore, ferries, tug and tow, to be able to remotely monitor, maintenance and tracking of all systems on board vessels is absolutely remarkable. And he's just a person who sort of wanted to bring those skills to do something hands-on. And then at the same time, have impact in an industry that's looking to decarbonize, in an industry that's sort of looking to be more accessible and equitable. So he can take those skills, and that's happening more and more. I'm seeing it at American Seafoods and Trident, one of some of the largest fishing companies and seafood producers here in the United States. I'm seeing it in our tug and tow companies, and they're bringing in, more and more sort of young, really smart people who have incredible skills that are wanting to apply those skills in a very sort of real and transformational way. So I see it starting to happen. That's my eternal optimist. We are slower, maybe slower than some, maybe even slower than most. That's likely true, but it's definitely happening. And there are folks like yourself and so many others sort of trying to push that boulder down the hill.
That makes me happy. And then some people tell me that, but the average ship owner owns 10 ships. It's not the big ones. It's not Maersk and the MSC and all of those guys. They have the funds to actually have a research department somewhere or buy the knowledge from somewhere. But we have 80,000 ships sailing around the world. And if they are owned 10 by 10, how can you then afford to follow the big trends? Yeah, they can't afford not to, but...
Right. Well, I think that's it. It'll become very apparent. There will be a point where it will switch and you won't be able to afford not to, whether it's because of your business model or because of the IMO or other global and national regulators, as slow as that process can seem sometimes. Yet it has, incredible influence. And so, it will flip at some point and you will not be able to afford not to. And by that time, because we're supporting sort of this transition on the early end, those tools or those technologies at that point will be more accessible. And the price points will come down for everything from batteries to software to services, because it'll be off the shelf because we're doing that work here up front. So I see, and that makes the transition slower and harder, but there will become a point where it will flip. I mean, you're seeing that now again in the auto industry too. Every major auto industry has now committed to going zero emission or going to electric in the next few years. Is it fast enough for our global climate goals? To be determined. It's sort of like to take a deep breath and hope we get there and stay under 1.5 degrees. But we have to continue the work that sort of help that point in time where it will flip.
We also need some help from our politicians, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm playing the devil's advocate here from all different angles. But I'm thinking about all this new alternative fuel. Yeah, that's good enough. But where's the infrastructure?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And there's sort of a chicken and egg case there, right? Well, what fuel types and what engines are we going to start to develop to support which fuel types, and what does that transition look like? And there's probably not one answer, right? It's probably ammonia and hydrogen and methanol, right? So which regions and which sectors and which routes are going to adopt which, and how do you decipher that infrastructure? Our politicians are going to have to connect closely with industry, with the beneficial cargo owners, right? And so many others to push that along. It's true.
Yeah, but also, that is why we need to tell our story, because if the politicians doesn't understand that we are the backbone of trade, global trade, and what we need, and if we are not able to tell them, then they can't support us. So that is also, how do we become more visible to the general public? I think we need that. Do you have any ideas?
Well, interesting enough, and for better or for worse, I think this global pandemic is playing a large role in that, right? The visibility and the challenges that we've seen across the global supply chain, as you have major stops and starts, in Asia and Europe and the US due to COVID pandemic. It certainly has, everybody here in Seattle now knows what the global supply chain is and that a port exists, right? And everybody who owns property on the water saw, dozens of ships anchored where they've never been anchored before, and are asking what's going on and what can we do about it. And so there has been a lot more visibility brought to that again. So, for better, for worse, or at least the visibility has been propped up there.
Still not the positive side of us.
Well, sometimes it's not, but it's sort of the need for change. Like, well, what do you mean there isn't data connectivity across a port? How can the port operate without data connectivity? An airport has data connectivity, right? You've got somebody in a control tower knows where every airplane is and, cargo moving through and all that, just in time arrivals. It's all managed and regulated. I think there's sort of some shock from many people that the maritime ports are just not, right? So sometimes that is a great instigator. Maybe it doesn't show us in our best light, but maybe it sure can instigate some change.
It's the same with the seafarers. The seafarers have been the unsung heroes of the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
But is that the picture that we want the next generation to think about? Wow, maybe I don't want to become a seafarer because maybe I don't get home then.
Yeah. Well, I think all we can do, I think you're right. It's a sobering sort of look at it, but I think we can highlight the areas where it's going well or where the tools are being put in place. We have one great example, another wonderful person is Dr. Ann Jarvis, who runs a company called Discovery Health MD. And she had 3 or 4 employees and was providing remote medical services to mostly the fishing industry. That was, they're headquartered mostly here in Seattle and they fish in Alaska. Remote medical monitoring and support services. And she was looking for opportunities to sort of digitize a little bit, get, a little closer to access to care and better connectivity with those vessels. And then the pandemic hit. And she saw sort of the need that the next season was about to leave. So I think April, May was the beginning of the next season. The pandemic was really hitting in March 2020. And we were going to have, thousands of workforce coming from around the globe to Seattle in March 2020 to start gearing up and crewing up for the fishing season. So Dr. Jarvis saw, what was happening. We have thousands of people flood into our region in the middle of a pandemic. They were needing to get on board these fishing vessels to supply, basically 70% of the United States commercial seafood, although much more of it actually goes overseas. Billions of dollars of an economic driver to our region. And how were we going to, quarantine, test, and support these vessels that were about to get underway in the middle of the pandemic. And then at the same time, we have all these global vessels that are coming into our ports. How are we going to sort of support and monitor that as it's growing? She now, through this pandemic, has 400 employees. She has grown 60 times over and is really, her and her team, responsible for saving the North Pacific fishery, I believe, and many others do as well, and sort of protecting our communities and seafarers from around the globe that were coming through this region, through testing procedures, getting access to safety equipment, and then once the vaccines came, vaccinating all of those fishermen, fishers, sailors, and seafarers that were coming through our region. And she built a strong company around it. Those are great stories. Those are people sort of like who care,
Yes.
Who do it because it's the right thing to do. And by the way, there's a great business model around that. So these are great examples, right, of where folks can come and find opportunity where their goals are, both starting a new company, creating a new technology, and doing something right for the world and for our industry. So I think those stories are out there. It becomes incumbent upon us, I believe, maybe myself and our organization, to be able to share those stories.
Yeah.
We definitely find ourselves in that role.
I agree. I totally agree. So what is the best part of being the head of the Maritime Blue in Washington State?
Right now, I'm just so proud of my team. I spent many years, working on ships and building crews and building teams. And then when I was doing so much policy work, it was really kind of just like a one-person shop. Thousands of stakeholders working with people every day, but it was just sort of a one-person shop. And so to build a team around this work has been really kind of empowering and enlightening, and keeping me really optimistic, because there are so many people out there who are passionate about this and are ready to sort of dig in and do the work and build relationships and get stuff done and don't be a jerk. And I've been really enjoying building a team around this work, just so we can see it being effective. And then getting to hear those stories like we were just talking about, Lena. I mean, I get to feed my optimism because I see so many passionate people who want to have positive impact in our space around the globe, for the ocean, for people and communities. So that feeds my optimism.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. I think that Caitlin actually knew what she was doing when she was introducing us, because I share your optimism. I've just been trying to be a little bit pessimistic to get you talking about all the good stuff.
Well, we can't be blindly optimistic, right? I mean, we need to know what the challenges are. We need to be realistic about what the challenges are. This is an industry that is perhaps slow to change, has very low margins, is relied upon every single day. But yet at the same time, and I love sort of drawing this analogy, this is where sort of my traditional mariner, traditional tall ships, old buildings comes in. It also has been maybe the most sort of resilient and sustainable industry over time, right? This industry has been around, almost forever. And we've made the transition from sail to steam to diesel, the container, the modern ports. We've had to. And yes, this transition may be more acute and may need to or be happening faster than we've seen before. But it will survive, right? And it will make that shift. We just have to make sure we're making that shift in the right way.
Amen. Yeah. So who would you be interested in listening to? Who do you think I should meet the next?
There's some wonderful people out there. I've been really appreciating sort of your focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in this industry, and the importance of that. It's been something we've been focusing on quite a bit. Not just for workforce, but for employers and for leaders. Buki Hao, of an organization she started called Melanated Mariners. It's a wonderful group. She is an incredible and sort of wonderful speaker on how we engage around diversity and equity and really justice around this industry. she's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joshua, for taking the time to speak to me. It was my pleasure.
Oh, Lena, absolutely my pleasure. I'm so glad that we get to connect. I do feel like we have a lot to probably continue to talk about. I'd love to continue the conversation around clusters and analogies with other sectors and the intersection of digitalization. So I hope we get to talk some more.
Thank you, Joshua. It was such an interesting conversation, I think. Last week here in Gothenburg, I had the pleasure of sitting down with the CEO of the MobilityXLab. Her name is Katarina Brud, and she has a background in the maritime industry. I asked her what the secret was behind the success of this incubator for the automotive industry. She told me that it all happened when the CEOs of the car manufacturers came to the same realization that collaboration is the only way forward. So, among them, they decided to set up the MobilityXLab, which is a collaboration hub that was founded in 2017 by 6 global companies to create and develop new innovations within future mobility with each other and with startups. Today, there are 7 partners. It's Sept, Ericsson, Polestar, Veoneer, Volvo Cars, Volvo Group, and Sensact. I am envious of MobilityXLab, I can admit that. If you don't know about them, please Google them. I will also leave a link in the show notes so you can find them. I have more innovative thinking in the pipeline for you. But for now, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.